Hey, what's up, parasites? Welcome to a flashback episode, kind of, but from the future. This is going to be episode 178. So if you're watching this later in the playlists, we are actually recording this in the year 2024, in December of 2024. So we're way ahead of where we actually are. In episode 177, I think we were back in like the year 2018 or something like that. So it's been a while. So good to see you. In the future, we're still here. We're still kicking. And things have changed. Our life is very different 6 years later, but we wanted to come back in time and tell these two stories and talk about this and fill in this episode because we had to delete this episode originally, 178. We had to delete it because we put some information out there that we were told wrong. I didn't think we did anything wrong in that episode, but someone was very adamant that we covered something and that we didn't cover it well. So we decided, hey, we don't want to upset anyone. It was somebody that was working on these Venom movies. And we said, all right, we'll delete it. Like, the guy was very pushy, threatened us with legal action and stuff. But I still was like, whatever, it's not a big deal. Like, if we got something wrong, we got something wrong, and we stand by that, and we will delete the episode. But I was always hoping we could go back and fill it in one day, and I think this is a good way to do it. We're going to talk about VenomVerse Reborn, which came out not too long ago, and we're going to talk about the original Sin story where Venom, Eddie Brock, goes back in time and tries to recorrect his own timeline and get his past self to solve the Sin Eater case earlier, to marry Anne earlier, and to have a better life where he doesn't hate Spider-Man and maybe not become Venom. And I thought that was really cool. And I said, you know what? This is the episode. We're going to go back and do episode 178 again. So thank you for being here. Whether I call it 178 or 178.1, which is a Marvel reference, doing the point one stuff, I'm glad we can come back and fill this episode in before the show ended. So thank you for being here. If you're watching nowadays, modern day, it doesn't matter. It's cooler if you watch it in order, though, and it seems like we time traveled, but we didn't. So this series, VenomVerse Reborn, I'm not going to dive too much into this because, I'll be honest, I didn't really like a lot of these stories. This book is a 4-issue miniseries. After they did Death of Venomverse, yeah, spoiler for people watching in the past, they have Venomverse, and then they do Edge of Venomverse, and then they do the Death of Venomverse, and now the Venomverse has been reborn just 6 months later after its death. And this is Al Ewing continuing his run and telling stories from the eventualities point of view, where he does this little story called 5 Questions. And it's the hand, the severed hand, future hand of Eddie Brock, going and talking to different Eddies or different symbiotes, different Venoms from different universes, kind of looking over them and seeing them be reborn as this universe is kind of expanding again. The multiverse for symbiotes is expanding again after its death, and also tying into his current run leading up to Venom War. So yeah, there's a Venom War coming up, just so you know. Al Ewing is the writer, and then Danilo Beirut does some of the art. But there's also like Justina Ireland, who's on this book, Christos Gage, you got Dan Slott, Philip Kennedy Johnson, who is doing Transformer books now, for those of you in the past, and they're amazing, just so you know. But in this book, the reason why I didn't really like this series too much is because it kind of did one of those tropes that I don't like with symbiotes, where it's like, hey, this is the Wakandan symbiote, which we've already seen. If you read Ta-Nehisi Coates' Black Panther run, there was a symbiote in that run. So it's kind of like, that doesn't feel too fresh. And we've seen other versions of, Wakandan symbiotes before. And then there's like the Insomniac Venom, which I did a short on, but man, I really did not like the story they told there, where Insomniac Venom gets pulled out of his video game universe and meets Null from the main Marvel comic universe. And it was just like a verbal pissing match. And then Null sends him back. It's not good. And I'm sorry, Christos Gage is a really nice guy. I've met him plenty of times, but that issue just really, not that I was super amped for it to begin with, but I was still hoping, because Christos was writing it, that I would really like it. And I really just didn't like it at all. So yeah, you get Insomniac Venom, which is Harry Osborn. You get a T-Rex Venom. Again, not very interesting. We've seen that before plenty of times. You get like a Viking Venom. This is kind of my thing. It's like, that's why I didn't really like the series and why I'm not going to really sink my teeth into reviewing it, because that's all it is. It's just like, here's this version, here's that version. Nothing really interesting, like the way the Edge of Venomverse did, where it was like, the conjointed twins, or Flash Thompson as president, or there's like a severed head Carnage that runs around. Like, there was just neat things in that I liked, that were cool, that this series I don't think really gave us. And all the stuff Al Ewing was doing with Eventuality didn't make me more interested in that version of Eddie either. So I just felt really disconnected from this. But they do set up in this the King in Crimson. They do talk about Venom the End, by the way, that really weird one-shot we reviewed a while ago, or in the future if you're watching in the past. But King in Crimson, so there was the King in Black at the end of Donny Cates' run, and then now this is trying to set up a King in Crimson, which could be Eddie Brock, because as of this moment now, we found out that Eddie Brock will be the new Carnage moving forward. So, yay. Although that does kind of sound a little bit interesting. So I'm willing to see where that goes. But that series, VenomVerse Reborn, even though it had some cool time travel elements and going into the multiverse and stuff, that really didn't pull my interest that much as Venom Original Sin did. Now, this book and this story, it's a Marvel Unlimited exclusive, so you have to have the app in order to read it. It's 8 issues. It's written by Steve Orlando, and there's art by Scott Koblish and Matt Horak. And they do a good job. Everyone does fine. Like, everyone does an okay job on this book. I don't hate this book. From a concept standpoint, I really like it, actually. And it's set us up for this, to where we could go back and finish, and redo episode 178. So that's kind of fun. But the premise of this is that there is an Eddie Brock in the multiverse that actually went into the light. He went into this world called the Lumina, and it's like this world of incandescent light, just bright all the time, happy, kind of like an Eddie Brock that got a happy ending for once, like where things just didn't go all to crap for him completely. He somehow in the future turns himself into such a positive being that he gets to enter this realm where all the other Eddies that become the eventuality, they all go on the same path. But this is the one Eddie that never went on that path. And it's because he has an opportunity to go back and change his past for the better. And that's what's kind of cool about this storyline. And that's probably where the coolness ends, though, unfortunately. But it's still kind of a cool setup. This character, he's called the Illuminated. He's the Eddie Brock that's dressed in white. He's in full white regalia. He's called the Illuminated. And he's kind of watching Eddie Brock in the past, or himself in the past, make a deal with Jack-O-Lantern. And he's like, look, man, I'm working at the Daily Globe. I just started here. I need some good headlines. So if you could attack some buildings, I'll get some good headlines. They'll pay me good money, and then I'll split it with you. And Jack-O-Lantern's like, dude, I can rob banks and get a ton more money. And he's like, but I think this is funny because this will blow up in your face. You seem like a regular dude. And I kind of like the idea of a regular dude, destroying his reputation in his life, and trying to work out a deal with me. So screw it. I'll sign up, and then let's see what happens. He goes, but you're going to regret this. I know it's going to ruin your life. And he's kind of prophetic in that way, because it does in a way. So Jack-O-Lantern attacks this building. There's 2 cops inside, and they burn. And Eddie has a chance to go, save them, and he doesn't. And then they burn to death. And instead, Eddie is focusing on Jack-O-Lantern fighting Spider-Man, who shows up in his black costume to fight Jack-O-Lantern. But after he beats Jack-O-Lantern, Eddie finds out that it's not Spider-Man. It's actually the Eddie Brock from the future, the light illuminated version of him, who came back in time, took over the suit, bonded with a sleeping Peter Parker, and then brought it to this fight. Remember that happened in the comics, where they would, the suit would just animate Peter and take him out and meet Black Hat, fight Hammerhead, fight all these villains. And while Peter Parker was sleeping, and then he would wake up the next day and feel like, he's like, man, I feel like I ran a marathon, or I got hit by a truck. And it's because the suit was taking him out for these nightly spins. Well, this is maybe a reason in a way for that, because this Eddie does that. He goes back in time using his power of light, teaming up with the eventuality, and they go back and put him into the consciousness of the symbiote, and that symbiote goes on to sleeping Peter Parker and brings him out into the middle of the night. So I just thought that was kind of neat. And then Spider-Man, Venom kind of possessing him in a way, future Venom is possessing Spider-Man, fights Jack-O-Lantern, but Jack-O-Lantern actually kills Spider-Man. And then also this, Jack-O-Lantern gets killed by Eddie, because Eddie's like, oh my God, I have to do something. And he kills him. He hits him from behind with like a brick or something and bashes his head open, Jack-O-Lantern's head. So Jack-O-Lantern falls dead. And then the future Eddie symbiote Spider-Man falls dead and in a fire, and they burn up. And then Eddie's like, holy crap, I have a story now. Jack-O-Lantern killed Spider-Man. And so his whole life changes. Eddie goes on this path where he marries Anne sooner, where villains kind of take over the city. I think Dr. Octopus robs a couple banks during one summer and then gets enough science stuff to like cure diseases. So it turns out he actually did want to be a brilliant scientist. He just needed money for funding, and he actually successfully does it. The Green Goblin doesn't like that, everyone out there, he doesn't know exactly if Jack-O-Lantern really was the killer of Spider-Man, or someone else helped out or whatever. So Green Goblin's going around killing other villains, thinking that they were responsible for killing Peter, which he wanted to do. And I'm guessing at this time this would have been Harry Osborn, Green Goblin, I'm assuming, because that just timeline-wise makes sense. I don't think Norman was still around. I think he was dead by then. So I think this was Harry Osborn going around doing that. And so it was just kind of neat. You kind of get a peek into this other world. And then Eddie, at a certain point, his life is not going well. Future self told him, hey, look, don't do this thing with Jack-o'-lantern. Instead, here's the real identity of the Sin Eater. Go back and write a story, not on Emil Gregg, but of Stanley Carter. Do that, and that'll change your life for the better. And then you won't have a hatred for Spider-Man and, blah, blah, blah. And so he failed at it because he died and he got sucked back to the future. So he's back in the illuminated world with Eventuality. They're arguing. They spend half the book kind of doing that. So that kind of slowed it down pace-wise for me. But then past Eddie is having this like very roller coaster life, where he's getting these scoops, getting these stories, turns in the Sin Eater anyway, he still does that. And he just boom, 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 just seems to be on a winning streak and then he's covering all these big stories and making money. But then eventually gets to a point where he's kind of nearing rock bottom again. And Anne is still married to him, but Anne's like, look, I'll pay for dinner today. And he's like, no, you shouldn't have to pay. Like, I should treat you. And she's like, yeah, but right now you don't have the money. And that's okay. Like, let me buy dinner tonight. You've bought me plenty of meals. And, she's being very supportive of him and stuff. And he's like, yeah, I get it. But this is that Eddie where, things in his mind aren't locked in. He hasn't become a good person yet. Even though he has good things in his life, he hasn't become a good person. So it's just him on that journey. So what happens by the end is that the illuminated Eddie from the future once again gets another chance to go back. He gets back into the body of Peter Parker using that symbiote. They go and stop Jack-o'-lantern. They save the 2 police officers so they don't burn alive, and they almost sacrifice their own life doing it. And then the cops pull Venom out, or Spider-Man out. So Illuminated is back in that body. He saves those cops, and then they come back for him to pull him out of the fire. So he actually does get saved, and thus kind of changing the trajectory. Eddie's now not responsible for those 2 cops dying, and they take out Jack-o'-lantern, Venom from the future, stops him, wounds him in the leg, and then says, just run. I'm not going to kill you because I don't want to mess up the timeline, but just stay away from Eddie Brock. Just go back to being a goon or whatever you were doing and just leave us alone. And so he does. And Jack-o'-lantern just kind of runs off with his tail between his legs and does not work with Eddie on any future stories. And then that's when he decides to sacrifice himself to save Eddie at the end. Future, Venom, Eddie, Illuminated, sacrificed himself to save Eddie. So he still kind of messes a little bit with the timeline, but he still saved Eddie in the process and got to pass on into the light. And now that future Eddie's transcended, you have past Eddie who's just kind of sitting there in the alley and he's looking up and, Spider-Man swings away. He's, kind of regained control of his body or whatever. And he webs off. And now Eddie hates Spider-Man because he's like, well, he doesn't really know at this point that it was future Eddie because all that got erased. That he introduced himself the first time they met at the beginning of issue 1, but this time when he came back to save the police officers and everything, he didn't reveal himself to Eddie before jumping in and saving him. So now he has that hatred towards Spider-Man starts growing from this moment, this sacrifice. But that future Eddie still went off into the light and he got saved. So I don't know. It's okay. Like the story's just okay. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I think the premise is neat. I think what they tried to do was neat, but it got a little convoluted, got a little weird at times. But it was cool to see Anne again. I always like seeing stories where they put Anne in there. They try to make her a little too wholesome and a little too good. I don't think Anne's a bad character at all, but she does, a lot of times people write her and they don't really give her any major flaws in any way or anything like that. And sometimes you need a little bit, for character arc and growth. You need to see them do something wrong in some way. But Anne was just very supportive. That was kind of her character in this, where she just supported Eddie. And I got to say, Eddie does need that sometimes. So I don't mind ultimately that they wrote her that way, because you kind of needed that. And so that way you can still kind of hate Eddie a little bit for not taking her support and doing the right thing still. That's because that's kind of Eddie's path in the beginning there. He was kind of a mess, and this story writes him so I kind of like that about it. But overall, VenomVerse Reborn wasn't something I really dug. It did have the eventuality in it. It kind of ties into things. This does too. It has the eventuality who's helping out the illuminated version of Eddie from the future. And so it still kind of ties into Al Ewing stuff. but it's kind of independent on its own too. It makes more sense if you've been reading Al Ewing stuff, but it still kind of works as a standalone, fun time travel story as well. So if you want to check it out, please do. I thought Original Sin was okay. VenomVerse Reborn, not okay, in my opinion. Not a very good book in my mind, and not one that I would own in my collection. Original Sin, it's on the Marvel app, so if you have the app, you have it. But if they made a printed copy, there's a chance I'd buy it, if they just put it all in one issue and sold it that way. But the way these are drawn with like the scrolling up and down, it'd be very hard to translate this to a physical copy. Not impossible, but it would take a lot of, thinking outside the box to kind of translate it that way without having to redraw anything. But it's cool. It's still fun to read these. I like the scrolling aspect and kind of how an action scene you can follow it by scrolling. And I like when artists do that. And I think these guys, Scott and Matt, did a pretty good job at that with this series. So let me know what you think, and thank you for coming back in time with me, filling in on episode 178. Now we got one again, and we can put that in its right place, and now we have a perfect 900 episodes. And then the ASMR stuff and the other things we do in the future or in the past, depending on when you're watching this, all of those will still be out there as side episodes for sure. But it's cool to have 178 back and for it to be a time travel story where we got to go back and talk about Eddie's past. So thank you so much for watching this episode. I really do appreciate it. And we'll have more regular future episodes that will be counting down to episode 900, which is the end of the Venom vlog. Those will be coming up very, very soon. Thanks so much. See you in the future. Peace.